You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm George Cedarquist, joined by Oliver Camacho, Weston Williams, and Ashlee Hardgrave. All right, this week, it's an opera theater doubleheader. First, we go inside the huddle with tenor Paul Groves, who is set to sing the title role in Philip Glass's opera Galileo Galilei, the OG science denial show before everyone was doing it. Then Andrew Jorgensen is up to bat. The general director of Opera Theater of St. Louis returns to the OBS 5 years after he last stepped into the batter's box. We'll find out if our top draft pick from 2018 is still a wide-eyed optimist about the state of the industry, and we'll get an overview of their season, which has already begun. Listen for the final field report from PJ as the Mets' current season wraps, plus in the 2-minute drill, just in time for Ashlee's return to the panel, it's the news about men behaving badly. Welcome back, Ashlee. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Spotify, click follow. Apple Podcasts, hit that plus sign. Send us a voice memo or email us your hot takes. Mailbag at operaboxscore.com. You can even just record your thoughts using the You Got Something to Say tab on our website. You're going to get your voice heard. operaboxscore.com. And however you contribute, you get the OBS beer coaster, the OBS lapel pin, and that gorgeous #1 OBS fan foam finger just for sharing your own hot take. Weston Williams in the house. Good to see you, Doctor.
I am indeed in the house. Thank you, patient.
You're in your house. Ashlee, it's been a minute, my friend. How are you?
It sure has. I was in Gigapalooza for a lot of May, and yes, I've come back just in time to cat hiss at the notion of all of the men that we have to report on this week. Although what I'm not going to report on right now is men, but women. Specifically the WNBA. People are all up in arms now that the season has started over this physical aggressiveness that they're seeing in the WNBA. First of all, where have you been? This is just how it is. But number 2, can we cool it on Caitlin Clark? She is a rookie. She is learning, and she is taking, I don't know if you saw that like flagrant foul that happened in the Sky versus that was a thing. But the, Coach Witherspoon has come out and said Kennedy Carter's been talked to about this. I mean, we will see, but it does seem as if there's some very specific attention being paid to one Miss Caitlin Clark.
School year has come to an end. My 8th grader has finally graduated. He was on the track team at his elementary school, and earlier today were the end-of-year parent-kid track races.
Oh my God.
I was able to run the 100-meter dash without puking on my shoes, but only barely.
Good on ya.
Let's talk some opera.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
Now in the 4th decade of his career, tenor Paul Groves is still adding roles to his repertoire. New York and Chicago audiences recently heard him as Coach Howie Albert in Terence Blanchard's Champion. On June 15th, he takes on the title role in Philip Glass's opera Galileo Galilei at Opera Theater of St. Louis. Groves went inside the huddle with Oliver, who first asked him to describe this role debut.
Well, it's a Philip Glass piece, and it's my first foray into Philip Glass. I've heard a lot of his operas and really enjoyed them. And this is a shorter piece. It's one act. It's only an hour and a half long. And it goes into the subject matter is Galileo and the trials of Galileo, because, Galileo was such a brilliant scientist, and he came up with a lot of what we know about science and the stars and the universe today. But what he came up with was heresy for the Catholic Church, in that he realized that the Earth and all the planets were revolving around the sun, whereas the Catholic Church at the time thought that the sun and planets were revolving around the Earth. So he wrote a book about how he believed that we were revolving around the sun, and it was heresy for the church. So he had to go to these trials. And first he had an inquisition, and then he went to the trials and he stood before the cardinals and the Pope. And the sentence was going to be death for saying this heresy and writing this down against the Roman Catholic Church. But he just happened to be and longtime friends with the Pope. And he had written the Pope letters years ago when he realized, after the Pope warned him that that he shouldn't be saying these things in his book. He wrote the Pope a letter, then Cardinal Barberini, before he was the Pope, and said, "You're right. I was wrong. You know, everything revolves around the earth, like it says in the Bible." And so this letter that he wrote, he was able to save and show that to the cardinals and the Pope at the time, which was this Cardinal Barberini. And he was sentenced to living out the rest of his life in confinement. So he lived in one little small room for the rest of his life, and that was his punishment for being correct about the earth revolving around the sun. It's beautifully written music. A lot of the Philip Glass that I heard in the past is very formulaic, and it's almost hypnotic. And this is much more lyric. There are a lot of voices in it, many voices. I play the older Galileo, and the story goes in reverse. So the first scene is Galileo right before death, blind, and thinking that maybe he was blind because he went against the church, and this is the punishment that God gave him for going against the church. And then it goes through the trials, but in reverse. So there are 10 scenes, and it goes in reverse all the way back to where Galileo, the young Galileo, which is beautifully sung by Sean Plum, who plays my younger self in the piece. And the last scene, or the last couple of scenes, are Galileo discovering the telescope and explaining the planets. So the story goes in reverse, actually, but it's very well put together, and it's certainly really well put together by one of our greatest stage directors in the world, Jim Robinson, who is the artistic director in St. Louis. But the music is very accessible on the first hearing, and I think the audience will really enjoy this and get to know a little bit about Galileo's struggles in life at the end of his life.
We spoke earlier for our radio interview about the longevity of your career, and now you are, a lot of your colleagues are either retiring, or just quitting life, for lack of a better word. But you're still, active in your career. What can you say to a tenor who makes it as long as you do, like the types of roles, the types of different types of works that one can sing when they're, I don't want to say sunsetting, that's not the right word, but when, they're past singing their Storimans and their Belmontes?
Well, I always wanted to have a long career. That was always my goal. I didn't want to be a flash in the pan. And I believe I can contribute a lot of that to the guidance I had in my life. I've only had 2 voice teachers my entire life. My first one was Robert Grayson, who is at Louisiana State University, and he was a professional tenor himself. He sang at New York City Opera and all over the world. So I got a lot of advice, practical advice about how the career works, and how to have a family and how to have relationships and lots of stuff besides just singing well. And I went to Juilliard, and my second teacher was the famous Marlene Amalis, who unfortunately just passed away in January. But she really stayed in the same vein for me as Robert Grayson did, in that Marlene was also a singer before she had her family, and her husband was a famous bass that sang lots with Spiro Malas. Yeah, he sang many times, and he was the preferred character bass for Joan Sutherland and Luciano Pavarotti in the beginning of their careers. So I got a lot of practical advice about how to save your voice and save yourself for a long career. The number one thing is being able to say no. It's very difficult when you're a young singer because you try so hard to just get professional jobs and be paid to sing that you don't realize that it's okay to say no if something's not right for you. Now, I was helped along because there were lots of times I would call Marlena or I would call the administration at the Metropolitan Opera, even long into my career, and say, do you think this is right for me? And lots of times they would say no, and I would really want to do it. But I resisted. I said, you know what? They have my interest at heart. They really know what my voice is capable of. And it's as a young singer and as a singer for your whole career, you want to keep the people that you trust, your voice teachers and your agents and the intendants and just your coaches, to a very small group of people that really have your best interest at heart. So I did this not purposely, but that's just how it worked out. And when I talk to other people about this, like Susan Graham or Matthew Polenzani or Bryn Terfel or one of my friends that I've sung with for many, many years, they all feel the same way about this. You have to have people in your life that you really trust, that have your best interest and your best vocal health at heart. So that's the way I kind of negotiated through that. Also, I was fine singing things that fit me well. There's lots of things that I would have liked to have sung in my career. I'd love to sing Otello, Verdi's Otello. It's my favorite opera. I would love to sing, Turandot, a Caliph. But there's no way, unless we start wearing wig mics, there's no way. My voice just wasn't right for that. Knowing what your voice is right for and what feels right for your voice is really important. If you get to the end of an opera and you're in the middle of your career and you can't speak anymore, and your voice is so tired that you really can't sing, it's probably not the correct opera for you. So a lot of that is just knowing what feels right. Because usually in vocal production, if you go to a teacher and the teacher tells you things that don't feel right to you and it doesn't feel right for your voice, that's probably not the right teacher for you. So I was lucky in that, just per chance happened upon Robert Grayson and Marlena Mollis, but they both teach in the same way. Their number one rule is, sing the most beautifully you can or make the most beautiful sounds with the least amount of effort. And that should be everyone's goal in singing.
I'm going to dovetail off what you said and introduce an idea. And I think you'll hear the question there somewhere. I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. We are in a time where the management that is, really working with the next generation of singers, they know less about the core repertoire. They know less about standard repertoire and the history of singing. And also, there's a lot of teachers now out there because voice programs are the most profitable for music schools. And there are a lot of teachers out there right now who didn't have the type of experience that Marlena and Spiro had. There's few people who had that type of experience. But you know where I'm going with this. It's like there's a lot of voice programs out there right now where, the supposed expert in the room doesn't have the institutional knowledge to really understand what saying no means, what protecting a young voice really means over the course of a career. And add into that a lot of opera companies now, and gratefully, are trying to do different repertoire to be more inclusive. So there is a lot of lack of expertise, across all sectors. And, I could imagine a teacher, having their student bring in some 21st century aria and not really knowing, well, what is the orchestration of this? What is this role? How long is this opera? What is the type of house that this opera is done in? So there's all these factors now that we can't rely on our own history of opera to inform the advice that we give to young singers. Now you find yourself in a position of teaching and of having done contemporary opera, so you actually are an expert in these things. But what can we say about this kind of moment that we're in studying voice?
Well, I agree with everything you just said. And one of the problems I see in that we're doing a lot more modern pieces is that we qualify voices only by the standard pieces. In that, if you're at a university and we've had this discussion many times at Louisiana State University about standard pieces, we'll say, okay, we're going to do Massenet's Werther. And we have a tenor and a soprano, and a tenor and a mezzo-soprano. Both of those roles are pretty heavy and require somebody that's very mature to sing. So we go into discussion about, do we have a tenor that can get through this role? Do we have a mezzo-soprano that can easily make it through this role? That discussion never happens with modern operas. We never say, just like you said, no one goes in really finds out what orchestration is, what the range is, any of these kind of things. They just say, okay, it's a modern piece, anyone can sing it. There's no expectations about how it's supposed to be, so it doesn't really matter. It matters. A lot of the modern opera that we're doing now are great pieces, but very difficult to sing, much more difficult than a lot of the standard pieces that we've sung for so many years. So we have to qualify exactly what it's doing to our younger singers to try to make it through some of these modern operas that aren't necessarily built for bel canto beautiful singing. So in everything I've tried to sing, I try to make it into something bel canto and make it as beautifully sung as I possibly can, because I find that that's the way for vocal health. It's tough sometimes because some of the modern pieces we have are written in an instrumental way, and you have to negotiate, how can I make it through this piece without doing damage to myself? Because we all know as singers, we're dealing with these two little vocal folds down here, these membranes, and it's easy to do damage to yourself, and it's very easy to get on the wrong track. And once you get on the wrong track vocally, it snowballs out of control very quickly. So anyway, I agree with everything you said. I believe that I teach, and I have a lot of students that are really incredible singers with great voices. But when they're 20 or 21 years old, I would like to teach them to sing in a bel canto way. And if we do an opera that's not written in that way, then they spend months and months singing in a way that's not very healthy. And I find it's difficult to negotiate with the students about how to sing this beautifully. If you're in my stage of the career, or in my career when I was even 35 years old, I'd been singing in the same way for so long that no matter what opera I did, I was still going to produce sound in the same healthy way. But when you're 21 years old, you can go in a lot of different directions, and it's a little scary for the younger singers.
Well, I just want to factor into that as well, that some of these operas are written by composers who don't have a lot of experience writing for the voice. And
yes.
I don't want to say that categorically. I mean, I think Jake Heggie actually writes pretty well for the voice. But there are, these operas that are coming out that are, a lot of money is being thrown behind them to, get the repertoire to be more diverse. And I really appreciate that. But on the same hand, some of those composers haven't had a chance to write for the Met or for Lyric Opera, which are gigantic houses. And you need a certain type of voice that can consistently sing in those spaces, and that takes away some detail in what the singer can do, since you're so focused on projection, unless you're Lisa Davidson, in which case you wake up in the morning and can be heard across the street.
She is amazing. I was in her debut at the Met, which was Peak Dom, and oh my God, what a voice. I've seen her in 2 or 3 things, and just not only the size of voice, but just the artistry that she has. You know, it's not all loud. She sings beautifully in legato and beautiful high, soft singing also.
Oh, yeah. And she's very smart.
She's amazing.
She's very detailed.
Yeah.
Okay, I have two more questions for you. One, to go back to something that you just said about teaching your students to have a bel canto technique. You yourself don't have a lot of bel canto repertoire under your belt. I know you've done it, but you're known more for your French and for your English. Can you talk about modifying the idea of bel canto to fit English vowels or even French vowels?
Yeah, well, I believe that everything is bel canto, and I was pretty well known for Nemorino in Elixir of Love, Elisia d'Amore, and then I did quite a few bel canto things. I did some new productions of I Puritani in Europe and lots of those kind of things. I really enjoyed it, but in some of those things, I didn't always tend in that direction because there was Pavarotti at the time, and I would disappoint myself when I would sing some of those bel canto things that he sang because it just didn't sound like him. Of course, no one ever did. But I try to approach, and I teach my students, and I think they all should, that everything should be sung like a Bellini melody, a Bellini songs, you know, Donizetti songs. All the stuff is meant to have that same feel, even in German pieces. You know, if you go back to the great German singers like Fritz Wunderlich or Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, everything they sing, even in Strauss, is still very bel canto. It's all connected. All the vowels are generated in a certain way out of the box of the mouth. Everything is very organic sounding. And I believe that, especially Mozart, I think Mozart and Bellini are very close to each other. So Mozart wanted people to sing that way, I'm sure. So well, anyway, like you said, I approach everything, even modern music, with a bel canto style of singing.
Well, I don't want to leave the audience behind because I think that we throw this word around, and it should be defined as often as possible. It's hard to define, but the basic idea being that you sing legato, that the vibrato speed is consistent, that you make register breaks as smooth as possible, and that everything goes through the classic Italian vowels, which is what makes singing with a bel canto technique tricky in English because we don't practice our scales on some of our weird American vowel sounds. You know, like when you're a student, you sing all of your exercises usually in 5 vowels, and there are more vowels than 5 when you start singing in French and in American English. So,
well, I usually, even in American English, if I do an American piece like this one I'm doing now, where it's in English, I still do a mid-Atlantic accent also. So a lot of my vowels are still very Italian or French. You know, I'm not one of the mind that thinks, you know, if we do a piece like Carl Floyd's Susanna, that it should sound like Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
So no one wants to, you know, I'm from the South, but no one wants to hear anyone sing with a Southern accent. It's all.
Well, to conclude, Paul, can I ask you, is this your first time at Opera Theater St. Louis?
It's not. It's my second. My first time was in 1991. I did a Colin Graham beautiful production of Eugene Onegin, and I did Lenski. And it was one of my first really big shows in the world of professional singing, and I still remember it very fondly, and I had a wonderful time here in St. Louis. We did a great translation of it, too.
Well, just for the audience who has not been to St. Louis, can you just summarize what the festival is like and what the experience is like over there?
Well, it's very family-oriented, and it's a real community. The Opera House itself is an odd shape in that there's sides where there's also audience, but everything is very close to the stage. So it's a real intimate setting with and it's the St. Louis Symphony. So the orchestra is fantastic. But we do four different shows, and it runs through June. They opened on Saturday with a beautiful production of Barbara of Seville with some great singers. And there's a show for 2 weeks. Once all the shows open up, there's a show every day, and it's a fantastic setting in a beautiful place at Webster College, and it's a pleasure to be back here after all these years. I don't remember a lot because a lot of the stuff has changed. Opera's really grown over the years, and there's a fantastic growth. But I still get the same sense of the company here of really family and also community. Everyone's working as best they can for the same goal, which is to make a wonderful product on stage.
Well, Galileo Galilei opens on June 15th and runs through the 29th of June. Paul Groves, thank you so much for being our guest on Opera Box Score.
My world is dust now, and all I loved is dead. Oh, let me trust now in what my master said.
A little bit of Paul Groves performing It Must Be So from Bernstein's Candide with the New York Phil, conducted by, my girl, Marin Alsop. Our thanks to Paul for his time. We were supposed to have that interview a few weeks ago, but then a tornado hit so close to his home and he had to reschedule. So we are so grateful for his safety. And I'm sure that opera theater is too. I mean, who is going to learn a Philip Glass opera in just a few weeks?
Well, it's only like 5 chords, so.
Ouch! I remember seeing the original world premiere of Galileo Galilei, the Goodman Theater. I think it was the 2002 season.
Really?
It was awesome. Yeah, Philip Glass was there for opening night. I worked, I think I was an intern at the time, maybe, or I was working in the box office, but I definitely remember him being there, and it was a big deal. The piece was bizarre. It was directed by Mary Zimmerman, who was the perfect director to tackle that. And I should check the stats on operabase.com, but has it really entered the standard repertoire? I wouldn't say it has. I think other pieces by
I would say
Philip
no.
Glass are being done more often. But it's a beast. It is an absolute beast of a show, and kudos to Opera Theater of St. Louis for programming it. Hey, if you're a new listener, subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, click follow on Apple Podcasts, you hit that plus sign. And of course, if you got a moment, review the podcast, which helps us reach new fans. You know how it works.
Yeah, you got something to say? Then yeah, all right, you can say something. This is Listener Mailbag.
Hello, Opera Box Score. It's PJ, another night at the opera. The moments afterward, we just saw a really, really remarkable performance of The Hours. Kevin Putz, the crowd really, really, really receptive. Donald, man, what did you think? This was fun, huh?
I thought it was fabulous. I've heard it before, but I hadn't seen it before. And when you see it in the house, it's a big difference. It's a beautiful score. It's vocal, it's well written, it's singable. It comes out at you.
And there's such variety. There are 3 different eras. If anyone has seen the film or read the book, this follows the film script. And you are capturing different times, different places, and the music does that. Kevin Putz does such a job of painting that sonic picture. In particular, I think of the 50s. There were some major chord progressions that they came in and reoccurred, and they were so full of empathy and full of power all the way to the end. At the very end, we have our 3 divas singing together to close the opera. Extremely touching. I had a tear. I was really touched by this thing.
At times it's full, but it also is so gossamer at times. It's almost a thread of sound. The way he uses the strings and the winds, it's beautiful.
So there was a moment, and I wanted to bring this up right in the middle of that last act, where I said, boom, Benjamin Britten. And I said, Peter Grimes, because there were some high things. There was a celeste, maybe, or glockenspiel-like. There were some effects that it just brought Peter Grimes to me a little bit.
Harp.
Was it a harp?
I think it was a harp, yeah.
He has to have studied Benjamin Britten, right? It's obvious, right?
Somewhere along the line, sure. My previous exposure to him was his opera Silent Night. It hasn't been done here yet. I don't know if it would work in this big house. It's basically about Christmas Eve, 1916, when the British and the German soldiers facing each other in the trenches.
Of course.
Decided, you know what? They weren't going to kill each other.
Yes,
they were going to
famous.
celebrate Christmas together.
Right.
It's a very moving work.
I was there a year ago when Kevin, I met him. It was opening night the first time. Met has brought it back. And I think for so many reasons it makes terrific sense.
Yeah.
They brought the three big divas who are Joyce DiDonato, Renee Fleming, and Kelly O'Hara.
Yes.
So everyone gets to do it again. The production gets to be used again. And the house was virtually full.
Virtually full. Yeah.
It's selling tickets. It's doing something new. It's brought back a piece that was such a rave last year. It continues to be successful. So I think from looking at the finances of the Opera House, this is kind of a smart move.
Well, it's a little plug for Kelly O'Hara. She trained as an opera singer, but she went into Broadway, and she's been a major light on Broadway for 20 years. And now to come here and all of a sudden drop her Broadway voice and pick up her opera voice again. And I've heard her a couple of times so far, and with each successive season, she gets better.
So good. It's PJ Ewing
and Donald Levine.
We're here at the Metropolitan Opera. We'll see you all again.
Good night.
Opera Class. Sports Radio Crass. This is Opera Box Score.
Well, we didn't intend for this episode to be a commercial for Opera Theater of St. Louis, but come to think of it, why not? Opera Theater has found a formula for consistently satisfying audience demand while leading the charge in diversifying the stage and commissioning new works with a pretty decent batting average. We got, Terrence Blanchard's Fire, Champion, Ricky Ewan Gordon's 27, Wong Ro's American Soldier, Tobias Picker's Awakenings, etc. So we invited General Director Andrew Jorgensen back on the show, who joined us at the start of his first season as General Director way back in 2019. Let's see if he still has that fresh from the draft pick shine.
Andrew Jorgensen, welcome back to Opera Box Score. It's been exactly 5 years since we last spoke. And later on today, we're recording on June 1st, you will open La Boheme. Is La Boheme the first opera of your season?
It's great to be back. It's been an eventful 5 years. Thank you for having me. No, La Boheme tonight is the second opening of our season. We opened exactly 1 week ago with a sold out and well-reviewed Barber of Seville.
With Andrew Morstein.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I love him. Yes.
And we've had a fantastic time opening the season with comedy. I think that's just what the world needs right now. And then on to La Boheme tonight, and a great season ahead in the weeks to come.
Well, when we last spoke, you gave us sort of like the format or the template for the type of repertoire that opera theater does. Can you tell us how that template has been working out for you and how that template fits this particular season?
That's right. Historically, opera theater has followed an overall pattern of something really popular, something maybe beloved, but one step less popular, something really eclectic, and then usually something that's either a world premiere or 20th or 21st century opera that our audience or the opera community really hasn't seen. That's a pattern that I think has existed over many, many years. We're trying some different things as we continue to emerge from the pandemic. And certainly in the Barber of Seville and La Boheme, we have two of the most popular A-plus titles that you could open a season with. And it's great to have them. Ticket sales for those titles are strong. And I think we have great productions that our audiences will be excited to see, whether you are a first-timer to come to these productions or whether you've seen many iterations of Boheme and Barber here and elsewhere. Those popular titles balance with two lesser-known works, or I should say lesser-done works, both of which have never been done before at Opera Theater. We'll do our first ever performances of Handel's Julius Caesar which is a masterwork that I've always wanted to do and that Jim Robinson has directed several times, but which has never, for different reasons, made it to Opera Theater of St. Louis. That certainly fits in our lesser done bucket at Opera Theater. And then our fourth title this season, Philip Glass's Galileo Galilei, which is not a world premiere. It's actually an opera which is going on 20 years old, but it's been done very, very few times. And so our hope is that in revisiting this really wonderful and timely work, that we will bring it back to acclaim and back to attention, and hopefully give it an important and needed, I think, second or third life in the opera world, and that companies and we'll start doing this work again.
Well, Paul Groves already gave us a wonderful preview of Galileo Galilei, but we did ever so slightly hint at the idea that maybe we need to revisit this work because of the idea of the rejection of science. Does that have anything to do with why you guys chose it?
It has everything to do with why we chose it. It's not didactic. It doesn't beat you over the head, but this work could not be more timely. As you know, it's the story of the trial of Galileo and when he was forced to recant his observations about the shape of the solar system, the rejection of science, alternative facts, the interplay between truth and structures and systems and authoritarian forces in our society. Those themes could not be more germane today. And it's our hope that through opera, through art, through coming together, through this story, that people might be prompted to think about issues that we face today. That has everything to do with why we picked this opera. And I think also we picked this opera, and there's a story attached. It wasn't originally planned for our season, but there's a great history at OTSL, in addition to producing world premieres, of taking works that have been really successful, but for whatever reason have not been performed as frequently recently. I think about what James Robinson did with Nixon in China, which performed here early in his artistic directorship, and then that production went on to 12 or 13 different opera companies in the years that followed. And it really brought that work back to attention. I think similarly, our 2021 production of William Grant Still's Highway 1 USA has brought that work back to attention, and we're now seeing it at many different houses across the country. I hope that something similar will happen for Galileo, which is a work that really should be heard and should be seen in lots of places at this time in our nation's history.
Well, as far as the new works or new-ish works go, you guys have a really great record. Just to remind the audience, you gave the world premieres of both Terence Blanchard's Champion and Fire Shut Up in My Bones. In fact, when we last spoke, you were set to premiere Fire Shut Up, and I couldn't get the name right. And I revisited our interview. I was like, oh my God, I sounded like such an idiot. We all know this opera now. We all know how to say it. So since we have this great record from you guys, can you just, give us the look into your crystal ball and tell us who's the next great composer that maybe will be featured at Opera Theater, or who's already been featured at Opera Theater that we're all going to know about very soon?
I'm not sure if our crystal ball is perfect. Certainly, we are incredibly proud to have been part of the success of Terence Blanchard's operas and to have brought his two jazz operas to our stage first. And it's been amazing to see Champion and Fire both go on to so many other theaters across the last years. We are still at that practice, world premieres. Not a new name, but a name I'm excited about. Next year, in our 50th season at Opera Theater, we will have the world premiere of a work from Ricky Ian Gordon, together with Lynn Nottage, a world premiere of an original story, actually by Lynn's daughter Ruby, It's called This House. It's a beautiful story of a family holding on to their historic brownstone in Harlem against, and the house is sort of alive with this family's extraordinary history. We are in discussions with Tobias Picker about another world premiere past that. I'm also looking forward. Jasmine Barnes and Deborah Mouton are two artists that we are extraordinarily excited about. They're making a name for themselves across the opera ecosystem. They participated this year in our New Works Collective, our community-based commissioning program. And we're now in discussions with them about a work for our main stage for seasons ahead. I'm not sure those are names that are new.
No, Jasmine Barnes is in high demand here in Chicago. So.
They are certainly names that we are excited about and looking forward to having with us in years ahead, and many more after that. It's amazing to see what Fire has done, and to think about what's happened in the 5 years since we last spoke about that.
Yes. Well, I want to get to that point, but before we walk away from the topic of the current season and maybe next season, I just have to say, casting for Julius Caesar is bomb. Emily Pogarel's a friend of the show. We love her. Kimon Mara, another friend of the show. So impressive. And, he's like an old fashioned diva. Like he reminds me, I feel like he studies Shirley Barrett and Florence Quibar, and he just knows how to take the stage, which makes me so excited to see somebody just like, okay, it's my turn now. Give me some space and let me sing. I love his presence on the stage.
I do too. And look, this is a work that we have never done before at Opera Theater of St. Louis. And when the work like this comes so rarely, we have to do everything we can to field the very best cast, because each aria is a showstopper. And so across this extraordinary cast, Megan Moore, Sarah Mesko, Emily Pogareltz, it's just, you mentioned Kimon. It's just a fabulous, fabulous cast. And it is so exciting to hear them sing. And for me, that is just a dream cast coming together. Elkanah Pulitzer is directing a beautiful, modern, and really, really stylish production. Daniela Candelari is conducting from the harpsichord. It is old-fashioned good singing in a stylish new production, and I think people should be running to the box office for this taste of Handel.
I am going to try. So we talked about your you sort of hinted at coming out of the pandemic, and we last spoke in 2019, and when we spoke, you had this sort of, I don't know, philosophy, I don't want to say, like analysis of the state of opera, about the leaky bucket. Can you remind me about the whole leaky bucket thing, just so we can refresh ourselves? How did you frame that?
Yeah, absolutely. Opera Theater had the good fortune before the pandemic to participate with the Wallace Foundation in a study across many different legacy arts organizations, opera companies, orchestras, theater organizations, performing arts centers, in a study called Building Audiences for Sustainability. And the Wallace Foundation invested enormous resources across 25 or so different organizations, empowering all of us to try different things to build new audiences, to combat that notion of the leaky bucket, that fear that we all have of aging audiences, subscribers who are stepping away, moving away, passing on, and to ensure that we have a vibrant audience for years and years and decades to come. That's a work that we participated in, which was incredibly informative as we think about building audiences, sustainability, and programming what we put on our stage in years to come.
And then one of the ideas that came out of that study was that audiences, both the legacy audiences and the new audiences, are attracted to canonical works. Is that still hold true?
We've learned several different things, and as as is both wonderful and frustrating. We've learned several different things, all of which I think compete with each other. It is certainly true that people are inclined to attend titles that they recognize. The data absolutely shows that if you are looking for a special night out and you want to have an aspirational night at the opera, that you might be more likely to purchase a ticket to a La Boheme than to perhaps a
Galileo Galilei.
than Galileo Galilei, which you may not have heard of. That is one really interesting data point. But another data point is that as we think about attracting younger audiences, and as we think about attracting more racially diverse audiences, whether in works that are about racially specific stories, families, topics, Terence Blanchard's works, it's similar, whether or not we're in those kinds of works, diversity on our stage, nothing moves the needle on attracting diverse audiences or younger audiences, because younger audiences, millennial and Gen Z audiences, consistently report that they also feel, whether or not they are white or non-white, they feel more included in diverse spaces and want to be participating in diverse spaces. And so when we see greater diversity on our stage, we certainly see an increase in younger audiences and in new audiences and in diverse audiences, but also the experience of operas like Fire, Huang Ruo's American Soldier, certainly help us in attracting audiences from communities that we don't always see at the opera. And so all of those things turn out to be true at the same time. And I think, as is the case for many different things, we have to be moving many different levers at the same time in order that we continue to offer programming that will excite and inspire audiences, new audiences, to try come and to come back to the opera.
Well, I'm going to throw you a curveball here. I didn't prepare you to answer this question, but I think you'll probably have an answer. We're talking about the idea of diversity and how inclusive art can draw inclusive audiences. But what can you say about inclusivity in the administrative pipeline for the arts?
Oh my goodness, it's such an important question, and I'm glad that you've asked. I think the short answer is that there's not nearly enough diversity within our administrative ranks, especially at the leadership levels, and that our organizations are all too often not yet authentically inclusive places. And so there's a huge amount of work that we have to do. And something that our company really reflected on during the pandemic and after the murder of George Floyd, and thinking about this learning across the last several years, is that perhaps we sometimes were given disproportionate credit because we had invested in works like Fire, works like Champion, because we've been perhaps relatively more diverse on our stage. We had perhaps not looked hard enough in the mirror at the lack of diversity in our administration, at who's making decisions at our leadership table, but how we are fielding the teams that support all of our work across the cast and company and backstage. And we've invested enormous resources across the last several years to begin to move the needle on fostering a more inclusive environment and be diversifying our administration, on changing who's at our creative table, thinking about how we can invite new creators, new leaders, our community into the decision-making process, thinking about what culture means at our organization and how we can move the needle on creating an inclusive space for folks who come to work with us, whether that's full-time or during the festival season. And it's work that will be ongoing. But absolutely, we know that we can't create authentically inclusive art and really reflect the diversity of our St. Louis community if we are not a more authentically inclusive organization.
Well, that makes me very happy to hear. And I know that you would have said something that felt authentic because every time I hear you talk, it always seems like you are thinking about these things and you have a lot of ideas about the future of our art, which obviously I care about a lot. And I know that the team here at Opera Box Score, we're really trying to think of the ways to keep this thing going, to make it strong. And it's exciting. I mean, there really is a lot of exciting stuff happening, and your company is certainly a part of that. Andrew Jorgensen, it's been great to have you back on Opera Box Score. Any Olympic predictions or any sports shout outs you want to give before we wrap?
I wouldn't know where to start, but I will predict that Mimi and Rodolfo will offer spectacular performances this evening. And whether that's a home run or a touchdown, I'm not sure. But I think the singing will be out of sight this evening at Opera Theater of St. Louis.
Thanks again to Opera Theater for carving out 30 minutes of Andrew's time for us. That interview, by the way, was recorded literally hours before the Prima of La Boheme. I've known Andrew a long time. He is one of the absolute best in the business. He's the perfect choice. I'm sure I said this back in 2019 season. The perfect choice to be leading this company. If you go to Opera Theater of St. Louis, you have to hang out in one of these beautiful striped tents that they have on like the front lawn outside the Opera House complex, which is where everybody after the shows goes to just meet and greet, and the bars stay open, and it is the most fun time. It's almost as fun as the 2-minute drill.
This just in, the 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up, here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
Jan Latham Koenig has been spared prison time in the UK after previously pleading guilty to child sex offenses. Last week, he was given a 14-month prison sentence by Judge Alexander Milne, which was then suspended for 2 years. Milne said that Latham Koenig has been, quote, humiliated in the public eye, and said that his successful career means that, unlike other defendants who may be, quote, unknown before and unknown after, that is not the case for Mr. Latham Koenig.
French magazine Le Canard Enchaîné has published an article accusing conductor Francois Xavier Roth of sexual harassment and workplace impropriety. The article spoke with 7 musicians who alleged that Roth sent unwanted messages that included inappropriate pictures. Violinist Marie-Annick Nicolas, who was the concertmaster of the Radio France Orchestra, accused Roth of inviting her to a, quote, virtual shower. And the former director of the Paris Philharmonic, Laurent Bayle, confirmed to Le Canard that he had been informed by the city of Paris of allegations against Roth in 2019. Roth told the magazine, quote, if I have gone too far, I would like to apologize to those I may have hurt. Cool.
The faculty of the Cleveland Institute of Music is pushing to unionize, citing recent staffing cuts, the mishandling of the sexual harassment investigation surrounding Carlos Kalmar, and the recent vote of no confidence in CIM President Paul Hogel. The upcoming union vote would determine if the faculty will be eligible to join the American Federation of Musicians, the same union that represents the Cleveland Orchestra.
Mid-Wales Opera is asking for financial help just months after the withdrawal of funding from Arts Council Wales nearly killed the company. A cash infusion from the UK's Shared Prosperity Fund and a few major donations have shone a glimmer of hope for the future. Quote, only a few months ago, we thought we would have no opportunity but to close down after one last production this autumn, said board chair Gareth Williams. But now, all we need to make this happen is to raise an additional £50,000 over the next 9 months.
And now for some good news. The Met has named soprano Leah Hawkins as the winner of the 2024 Beverly Sills Award, which carries a prize of $50,000, not pounds. Past recipients of the award include friends of the show Anthony Ross Costanzo and Ryan Speedo Green. Of the honor, Hawkins said, I am in awe of the legacy of Miss Sills, whose vocal, artistic, and social prowess continue to inspire us all. I hope that my passion for people and my love for singing reflect the brilliance she inspired not only in my own life, but in those she touched on stage and off. Ooh, same girl, same.
Peter Gelb has received the Foreign Policy Association's medal for his cultural diplomacy. Said Pete, I have devoted my career to cultural diplomacy and playing a role in elevating humanity through art and artistic exchange.
Opera director and former director of the Moravian Silesian National Theatre, Ludek Golat, has died. Originally working as a soloist, he transitioned into directing in the 90s and also worked as an assistant director at the Prague National Theatre.
And on this day, June 3rd, 1660 brought us the birth of composer Johannes Schenk, who wrote what is very likely the first opera in the language of Dutch. 1801 was the birth of Czech opera composer Franz Schraub. One of his songs became the Czech national anthem. 1824 was the first performance of Auber's Les Concerts à la Cour ou Les Débutantes in Paris. 1832 was the birth of French operetta composer Charles Lecoq. 1858 was the birth of German baritone Karl Perron in Frankenthal. He created Orestes in Electra, Baron Ochs in Rosenkavalier, and Johanna in Salome. 1904 was the birth of American tenor Jan Pierce in New York City. 1922 brought us the first performance of Stravinsky's opera Marva at the Paris Opera. 1937 was the birth of English soprano Valerie Masterson. 1947 brought us the first performance of Houlenk's opera Les Mamelles de Thérésias, the breasts of Theresias, at the Paris Comic Opera. 1953 brought us birthday twins in the form of English soprano Lynn Dawson in York and the birth of English soprano Elizabeth Byrne in Lancashire. And in 1964, today was the first performance of Menotti's Martin's Lie.
And that's your 2-minute drill.
Dans le Connecticut, je dois vous faire la cuisine à Zanzibar.
Donnez-moi du lard, je te dis. Donnez-moi du lard.
Vous l'entendez, il ne pense qu'à l'amour. Mais tu ne te doutes pas, imbécile, qu'après avoir été soldat, je veux être artiste, je veux être aussi député, avocat, sénateur, ministre, président de la chose publique. Et je veux médecin, physique ou bien psychique, diaphoré, la mougre, l'Europe et l'Amérique, faire des enfants, faire la cuisine, non, c'est trop.
Denise Duval singing an aria from Les Mamelles de Thérésias with composer Poulenc at the piano. Speaking of the line of the husband, by the way, that was recorded in 1959. It was one of the first operas I think I sort of directed professionally, Les Mamelles de Thérésias. It is so good. It's so wacky. It has parts for everybody. It's 90 minutes long. Great orchestration. It's one of my absolute favorite pieces, I think, of all time. And of course, Denise Duval would also sing one of the major roles in Poulenc's Dialogues of the Carmelites as well. Ashlee, you've been off the show for a while, so we can start with you on the Men Behaving Badly roundup.
What a great welcome home present, you guys. Thank you so much.
Sift through the overflowing toilet that is the 2-minute drill. Jeez.
I mean, here's the thing. It's at this point, it's not if or when, it's who and how many times. That's where we are at this point in our history. And we're seeing parallels here that we're also seeing over in the orchestral world. I once again bring up the Queen of Filth herself, Catherine Needleman. If you are not following her on social media or on her website, which is the Queen of Filth, there are lots of people that are coming to her with these horrific stories and abuses of power of what she calls the BFM, the big fancy man. And we just have our own version of it over here. We have a couple of different big fancy men's, either that have been, newly introduced to us as doing something egregious and abhorrent, or a reminder of something that was egregious and abhorrent. And it is a real bummer. And what's more of a bummer is that I am wholly unsurprised every time it happens.
Are you less surprised that these things happen, or less surprised that there's no repercussions and there's no accountability?
Yes, and I mean, can we use the rules of improv here? I mean, the thing that got me so much about old Jan over in the UK getting his sentence immediately commuted as soon as it was offered to him. I'm not somebody who knows UK law very well, but boy howdy, to say, oh well, he's old and embarrassed and his career is over. He's suffered enough. No, the F he hasn't. I'm sorry. And it's. The only thing that sort of makes that one a little bit less uncomfortable for 1 click, 1 degree over into the world of righteousness is that he was accused of these offenses towards a child. And you listeners, you can't see me on camera, but I'm using air quotes here because he was actually talking to an undercover police officer. But Jan thought it was a child. Jan thought it was a young man. And so the fact that no child was hurt doesn't necessarily, I mean, I've heard people say, well, if there's no true victim, then the sentences are lighter. That happens more here in the US than it does in the UK, I think. But still, it's still garbagey, even though there were no official children hurt in the bad doings of old Mr. Yon.
That we know of.
That we know of. That's the thing. This is just one instance. So it makes me so sad because this... Well, it makes me sad as a woman, but it also makes me sad as an artist and a musician and as a fan of these art forms because our community deserves better. We're struggling enough. There are enough things that are working against us as we try to keep these art forms and their histories and their legacies afloat.
Yeah.
And now you've got all of this stuff giving us this bad rap out in the universe, out in communities. You know, these sorts of things go a long way in trying to help us draw in new fans. And if the bylines and if the Google News articles that pop up are of all these men behaving badly as opposed to here's this cool thing that happened in insert opera house here, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Yeah, it's so hard to introduce an opera newcomer to one of your favorite recordings that happens to have a certain schmacido, schmasmingo.
Shames your mind. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's just like, it's like, I legitimately like, and what's also bizarre to me is like, you know, the Me Too movement, you know, which really kicked off a lot of these accusations
10 years ago.
A long time ago. Yeah, a long time ago. And like some of the stuff is like more recent, you know, and I'm like, did you not get scared by everything popping up at the very least? Like I obviously I don't get like on even a more fundamental level, but like, I don't know. I feel like it's so frustrating to be like, I thought like, you know, every few months I am reminded that we didn't get everybody the first time. You know what I mean? Like, you know, the big waves of like the big names toppling and then, you know, nothing happens for a while. And then a couple more people will suddenly pop up in the news and topple. And then we're like, was that everybody? Did we get them? And then, you know, another, you know, 6 months goes by and it's so... It feels like pounding your head against a wall.
Yeah, I mean, the liquor of power goes a long way and it keeps you drunk for longer than you ever anticipated. So I think so many of these men, there are some women that are tangled up in this, but let's speak in generalities. The majority of these, at least that we know of so far, happen to be men. And there's, you know, there's sort of the physiological, the biological, which I'm not even going to get into. I think it's much more about power. I think it's about power. And I also think it's about, well, that's not going to happen to me. I'm going to be able to get away with it. I'm not going to get caught. And so that's one of the things that really is at the common thread in all of these things is that it's not just about the abuse of people. It's the abuse of power. It's about how power goes to people's heads, most people's heads once they get it. And that's, for me, one of the core issues of this.
Good call. Bad call on Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call to wrap things up for the week, starting with Weston Williams.
So I have a bad call. There was a New York Times article that came out. There was just this I don't want to like name it because like it didn't do anything bad per se, but it really rubbed me the wrong way. It's this love letter to the Sydney Opera House and all it represents. And the writer waxed poetic about, you know, what a shining beacon it is, memories they have associated for it. The entire time, not once does he mention, the opera part of the opera house.
Oh, great.
It's just something that I feel like I've been like, you know, something that always gets me is whenever there's an opera house in a community that, you know, is no longer an opera house. I mean, this isn't really the case with the Sydney Opera House because they do still do operas there, but it's certainly a secondary sort of thing. But like, it's such a have your cake and eat it too. You want the prestige of being called the Opera House or like, ooh, that's the Opera House. And that's like, you can't even throw on a bohème once in a while. Come on, guys. That's my pet peeve. That's my bad call.
Ashlee Hardgrave.
Well, in good calls from the New York Times, there's an article that's come out this week honoring the storied career of Donald Palumbo, who this spring is going to be stepping down after 17 years as the chorus master for the Metropolitan Opera. And it's just it's a nice little article by Zach Wolf that speaks, you know, pretty lovingly of his tenacity, his, you know, polite but constant, sort of strive for perfection. And I can say this as someone who has gotten the opportunity to work under Palumbo for a couple of different preparatory performances here in Chicago. He really is... I don't know how we're supposed to bottle and memorialize all of the things that Maestro Palumbo knows, but I hope we can, because he is absolutely the mild-mannered perfectionist that they speak of in this article. And every time I've worked underneath him, it was an absolute joy. So I wish him a wonderful, wonderful retirement.
A true legend, Donald Palumbo. Good call from me, of course. Happy Opera America Conference and the World Opera Forum happening. When this podcast goes out, we'll be right in the heart of it all. Look, I've been hard on the city of LA. I've been hard on the opera companies in Los Angeles. I've been hard on the Opera America Conference, and I've been hard on Opera America. The fact of the matter is that it is a great week. It's all the more special because the World Opera Forum is happening back to back. My challenge, of course, to you all who are listening is let us know how this conference is going. Let us know who's talking. Let us know what you're seeing, what you're talking about, what you're thinking, and what you're feeling. Mailbag at operaboxscore.com. That's it for this week's edition of America's Talk Radio Show about opera. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Get your voice heard. Find links to stuff we've talked about at the website, operaboxscore.com. And that's also where you can put your money where our mouths are. Give back to the OBS using that Support the Team tab. Your announcer is Norm Waddell. Your creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. And your audio editor is Weston Williams. For co-host Ashlee Hardgrave, with guests Paul Groves and Andrew Jorgensen, I'm George Cedarquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you raise 50,000 pounds in 9 months. We're back with an all-new show next week when we celebrate Father's Day with tenor Julien Prégardien. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more men for Ashlee to yell about. Join us.